Silicon Valley is a little bit like Las Vegas in some ways. What happens in Silicon Valley stays in Silicon Valley, but no longer. Now the secrets of Silicon Valley are out, thanks to Deborah Perry Piscione, who is the author of a new book, Secrets of Silicon Valley, what everyone else can learn from the innovation capital of the world. Deborah, welcome to TechCrunch TV.
Thank you so much for having me.
So Deborah, in a minute or two, what are the key secrets of Silicon Valley?
Well, you know, a large part of it is based on Silicon Valley's culture. As you may have read in the book, I actually came here from the East Coast. I was indoctrinated in this very closed-minded culture where the mantra was information is power, you withhold information, and in fact you use it against your enemy when your enemy is most vulnerable. We moved out here less than 7 years ago, and I literally went into culture shock. And so from the perspective that we look at...
What do you mean in culture shock?
Well, I'm about to get there. So, you know, from the perspective that we typically look through the lenses of economic policy in terms of fiscal and monetary policy, to me what Silicon Valley was about was so much a culture, almost that third leg of the stool, that really permeated so much of its innovation success. So part of it really just boils down to people and the way that people treat one another, collaborate, work in this open and trusting environment. And I recognize, you know, I'm not trying to paint a broad brush here, but clearly there was something about Silicon Valley that the rest of the world could learn from.
Who epitomizes this, or which company or individual epitomizes the secrets of Silicon Valley so well?
Well, I think even dating back to the 50s, when you had sort of the Shockley semiconductor guys who then spun out and started their own companies, I mean, there was a real disdain for East Coast hierarchies. They wanted things to be really different. They wanted employees to be valued, and the recognition that whether you're an administrative assistant all the way up to the CEO, everybody really contributes to the success of the failure of that company. But in my perspective, which I write about in the book, not only did local Silicon Valley companies embrace sort of this unspoken rule, but companies like Google embraced it and then exponentially expanded upon that and really just looked to provide a work environment in terms of the way that people live their lives here, which I think is a really critical component.
A lot of books have been written about the supposed secrets of Silicon Valley, about flatness and openness and radical transparency. What are you saying that's different?
Well, I think that it's been written about from an academic standpoint, but I was really curious to the hows and whys. How was it this way? Where did it started? Why did Silicon Valley, you know, from its humble roots of really being these orchards, how did it evolve into the innovation capital of the world? And I think that's really critical, because if you can not necessarily replicate Silicon Valley, because I don't believe that you fully can, but I think there's a lot of policies and principles and the culture that can be adopted. You know, I say everybody needs to think of themselves as a startup, so that doesn't matter if you're an individual based in Minsk, or you know, you're a company, global multinational company, or a corporation, or a municipality, to a state, to a federal government or a global government. I think everybody needs to recognize that we're shifting in our economy and our approach and how we treat and value employees. Everything is going through this monumental shift. And now is a real opportunity to learn from Silicon Valley's success and see what can be applied, you know, whether you're an individual or you're a government.
Where do you stand on whether or not Silicon Valley can be emulated?
You know, I don't believe that it can be fully replicated. There's so many factors that I identify in the book. I mean, it just happens to be, you know, the perfect population. And I think this is a place that's recognized for not stability, but quite the opposite, where people can jump around and move way beyond their skill set. So it's not a place for people who really crave stability. And so much of the population, you know, in all due respect, is
well, you're
is more
saying
like
people
sheep.
shouldn't crave. But only losers crave stability. Is
No,
that what you're saying?
No, I'm not saying that at all. I think there's a portion of the populace that thrives on entrepreneurship, thrives on risk, and there's a vast majority of people who don't, that prefer stability and being with the same company for a longer term to ensure that they have a paycheck at the end of the day.
Where do you think has come closest in America or elsewhere to emulating Silicon Valley? Is it New York? Is it Austin?
No, I wouldn't say so. Actually, I say that Israel is the closest to emulating Silicon Valley. You know, we'll see. we'll see what happens in New York. I think they're far
But you're not really that hot on New York at the moment? You don't think they're doing a very good job?
No, because I think...
Are they too hierarchical?
It's very hierarchical. It's
Respect
very
for
much...
tradition. I hope there's no one from New York watching.
Well, look, I wouldn't say anything. I'm happy to speak here, and I'm happy to speak to people in front of New York. I think having come from the East Coast and really understand that entrenched culture that is very much based on greed and power, the true commodity out in Silicon Valley is ideas. And the money and the power may follow, but it's not the guiding principle.
Why have the Israelis figured it out? Is it Yossi Vardi?
I think that Israel is a very interesting situation. First of all, because every boy and girl has the opportunity to serve or is mandated to serve in the military, there's a lot of exposure to technology and innovation, and we all know that military technology really drives a lot of innovation. So that's part one. It also has a similar populace in terms of numbers, the area that, whether you call Silicon Valley and extend it into San Francisco, but population-wise, it's a similar demographic in that respect. And there's tenaciousness that is required when you're building something, and the ability to keep going and believing that anything is possible.
Deborah, there's going to be someone out there in the audience who has a good idea that's perhaps trying to develop that idea. They may be in London, they may be in Iowa. Should they come to Silicon Valley? What are the advantages of actually coming here?
Yeah, I don't know that you can just come here and visit, and those of us
Well, I mean, come here, not visit,
area,
but should they relocate? Because many European entrepreneurs, for example, are relocating. Many people from inside America come to Silicon Valley, give up where they're originally from.
I think if you want the greatest chance of success, there's a reason why not everything has been invented or innovative here in Silicon Valley, but it's certainly most technologies have been commercialized here. And I think if you don't want to go through the barriers of trying to sell people on your idea, this is the place to be for the greatest maximum potential for success.
What are you saying in the book that really would shock someone?
Well, I think
that's slightly outrageous or controversial.
Really, coming from the East Coast, even just when we...
What is the East Coast, by the way?
It's this place on the East Coast of the United States. But
where exactly? Is it?
Washington, D.C. area in New York.
Which is pretty gross, right?
Yeah, it's pretty gross. It is. I say I spent a lot of time in the first chapter just not really doing anything for the 18 years that I spent in Washington, D.C.
You must have kissed the ground when you came here from D.C.
I didn't really know until we actually came because of my husband's job, not necessarily because of drive that I wanted to be out here. But it was quite surprising to me. But I think back to your question about what is most shocking, I think even just learning about Google's benefits and allowing people to operate having 20% time when that's truly enforced or not, it's still such a dichotomy between the controlled environment that much of the East Coast operates, rather than Silicon Valley really kind of hinging on chaos.
Finally, Deborah, the Apple issue, the Apple question, because this always comes up in these kind of conversations. We always talk about openness, transparency, doing away with hierarchy, team play, all the rest of it. And then we come to Apple, which is, of course, in many ways, an even more successful company than Google. And it was run essentially as almost like a totalitarian organization, very strict hierarchies, secrecy, almost a paranoia internally. How would you account for that?
Well, I think because the basis was that the company was really founded on evolving, constantly involving innovations. And so absolutely there are contrasts to the Silicon Valley story. I mean, there's some other companies that I won't name that clearly don't.
Now you've mentioned.
Well, I mean, I think that the Oracle certainly has that reputation as well. But many people will also say, working at Oracle and working at Apple, they were surrounded by some of the smartest people they had ever come across. But because Steve Jobs was always really pushing the limit in terms of technological innovations, I mean, people think that, like the iPhone was actually invented, if you will, at a much earlier time and didn't really come to market. It was sort of ahead of its time. So if you thrive in that environment where you're thriving for excellence, some people are going to be able to do quite well in a much more controlled dictatorship, if you will, and other people may, do their best work at 3 a.m., not sitting in a cubicle, not, working under the auspices of what we know as the industrial revolution of the work style that's mandated somewhere between 8 and 6 or 9 to 5, but allowing people to have the freedom and the creativity to thrive when they work best.
Well, there you have it. The secrets of Silicon Valley are out. They're public. They're transparent. Deborah Perry Piscione, the author of Secrets of Silicon Valley. Thank you so much for appearing on TechCrunch TV, and I hope you'll be outing other communities in future.
Thank you so much.